Hi all! I'm back with another reading from Daughters of Fire and Sea, the first book in my epic series, and we last left off with the end of chapter 3, and that was Runa's perspective, and if you remember, they are in the Vale, which, like I said last time, is not on this map, because that is the space in between the living world, Aerith, in the case of my book, and the underworld. But yeah, so let's find out what happens next. All right. Chapter 4, Lyric. It was strange walking in the dark. Without the moon or stars overhead, Lyric couldn't shake the thought that they were deep underground, leagues of dirt and stone between them and the surface. The darkness surrounding her was absolute, and the weak glow of the light orb over her head could not ease Lyric's sense of being trapped. She saw no outlines of trees or hills, no signs of life. Was there an end to the darkness? Would she find the unseen horizon if they walked far enough? Lyric felt vulnerable and exposed, but there was also a curiosity inside of her, thready like the light, that wondered what the dark concealed. If the old stories were true, then the goddess Hel, one of the Trinity, had created the Vale and the underworld and placed it into the hands of two demigods, Valen and Valaine. Were they here somewhere? Were the old ones, the dragons? "What are you thinking?" Kel asked. His voice was so close that Lyric squeaked, nearly jumping out of her skin. She flushed, hoping Kel couldn't see her face clearly in the dim light. "Dragons," she said. Her voice came out broken, pitched high, and she cleared her throat. "I was wondering if they're here somewhere." She looked up at Kel, who drew even with her, his long legs matching her stride. He didn't look like the hale young men from her valley, all rough edges with broad, sun-browned faces and arms thick from felling trees and plowing fields. There was an elegance about him, as though an artist had sculpted his face. He looked made, not born or steeled by hours in the sun. Kel smiled, his sun-lightened hair shifting across one eye. "Ah, your ancestors." Lyric blinked. It seemed so ridiculous. She laughed, unsure if she believed it. If their mother was from Rendishar, then Lyric also had dragon blood. Was that possible? Her blood was as red as anyone's, and she certainly wasn't immune to fire. A dragon would be invulnerable to flame, wouldn't it? Why not its kin? "I'd never considered it," Lyric said, shaking her head. "I can't do magic." "How would you know?" Kel asked. Lyric supposed Kel's question was a fair one. How would she know? Just because she wasn't shooting sparks from her fingertips didn't mean that she lacked magic. She'd never actually tried a spell. Books on magic weren't accessible in Khalees, especially not in Elea's Hollow. "True," she admitted, smiling. "Maybe Mama will teach me." Lyric glanced at their mother's straight back and watched her shoulder-length red hair sway across her shoulders. No, it was unlikely that their mother would teach her. She'd kept her ancestry from them, told them they were alone in the world. If all her actions stemmed from the desire to protect her and Runa, she'd try to keep them as far from magic as possible. "I think they are here, somewhere," Kel said, interrupting her thoughts. "The old ones." "Really?" Lyric resisted the urge to peer off into the darkness around them. A dragon was not sitting out there watching them pass. Kel nodded. "You know about the demon war, right? How the demigods left to follow the Trinity to the beyond?" "Yes," Lyric said. "And then the dragons, created the High Council to maintain peace across Aerith. Despite her isolation in Elea's Hollow, she had been taught the histories of their world." "Yes, and after they ruled for several hundred years, they created the Human Council and left." "Not to follow the Seven or the Trinity?" Lyric asked. "No, they retreated to the Vale," Kel said. "They didn't desire to abandon Aerith completely. They wanted to be able to return if there was a need." He smiled. "At least that's what the stories say. Sometimes we can't be sure what is a myth and what is true history." "I wonder what would bring them back?" Runa asked, on the other side of Lyric. Her voice was muted, as though she hadn't meant to pose the question aloud. "Not the taint," Kel said, his own voice low, unsettled. Lyric glanced at him. "The what?" A faint flush darkened his cheeks. "The poison released during Thenda's destruction. Whatever happened tainted the ground, the water." Lyric's eyes dropped to the mark on his neck. "I knew everyone died, almost everyone, but the taint is new to me." She looked at Runa, meeting her sister's frown. Maybe one country is a small thing to the old ones, Kel said slowly. Perhaps if it destroyed the entire eastern coast, or if the taint had spread. Has it? Runa asked. Kel's jaw tightened. I don't know. I've returned to Thenda only once. If the taint has spread to Rendashar or south to Olaporia, we should have heard of it. I've seen no signs in Chiancia or Jaina. It hasn't spread to Rendashar, Elena said, ahead of them. Lyric glanced at their mother's back. At the house, Kel said his tattoo stopped him from talking about what happened in Thenda, but who had given it to him and why? What sort of mage was powerful enough to physically silence him? Powerful enough that no one even knew what caused the destruction or how to fix it. Why was it still a secret? What do you remember the day Thenda was destroyed? Lyric asked Kel. She studied his face, watching as his jaw tightened and his eyes grew dark. He seemed frustrated and angry, but also sad. I remember the morning, Kel said. I remember being with my mother in Salta. She was agitated. She wanted to leave, but my father wanted to enjoy the celebration. It was the 7th night to Daemonia, and the capital was filled with people. I got lost and ended up in the catacombs. I had some kind of sweet in my hand. My fingers were sticky, and I was calling for my mother. Then He stopped, the cords tightening in his neck, and put a hand against the side of his head. What's wrong? Lyric asked, worried. Kel swallowed and touched his throat, fingers splayed over the skin. It's blank after that. I remember later, the chaos, the screams, but I can't. He winced and shook his head. What happened after? I can't talk about what I remember, not without... His voice was tight, and Lyric put a hand on his arm. Without pain. You remember before and after, Runa said, but not the actual event? Not what happened? Not who was there beyond your parents? Kel looked ahead at Elena's back. Yes. So someone caused it, Runa said. Accidentally or purposefully, someone is responsible. Horror crawled across Lyric's back on spidery legs, and she shivered. She stared at Kel with sympathy and dismay, trying to imagine what it felt like surviving something so horrible. His family had died there. He was alone. A fierce desire to punish whoever had hurt him burned inside her heart, and she reached for Kel's hand without thinking, twining her fingers through his. He seemed surprised when she touched him, his eyes clearing, but he didn't pull away. Instead, Kel's fingers tightened on hers. His hand was cold, and there were calluses on his fingers. Lyric's chest tightened, and her cheeks flushed as heat slid down her neck. She'd never held a man's hand before, not in this way. She wanted to smile, beam foolishly, but the horror still lingering in the air, and the look on Kel's face brought her back to the moment. Lyric swallowed, and a chill settled inside her. Why Thenda? Runa asked suddenly. Lyric glanced at her sister's face. Runa was frowning in concentration. Mysteries always sparked her interest, especially if they involved someone being abused. I don't know, Kel said. He sighed angrily. Thenda was peaceful. He glanced again at Elena, and Lyric narrowed her eyes. What did their mother have to do with all of this? With Kel? She was so focused on her thoughts that she nearly plowed into her when Elena stopped suddenly. Kel prevented Lyric from stepping on her mother's heels with a tug on her hand. She looked up at him, lips parted, and he grinned sideways at her. Ow, Runa said. She'd bumped into their mother's shoulder. Glancing back at Runa, Elena smiled and shoved the compass into her belt pouch. We're here, she said. Lyric blinked, looking ahead of them. A shimmering purple haze diffused the darkness. Rocks and sand were visible beyond the film, but they rippled, as though she were viewing the landscape through a veil. We're where? Runa asked. The way station, Elena said. Everyone hold on to me. Lyric reached for their mother's shoulder, along with Kel. Runa, surprisingly, accepted their mother's hand. Elena seemed startled by it as well, and she looked at Runa longingly. Drawing in a breath, Elena nodded and took a step forward, carrying them with her. The darkness vanished, and Lyric blinked in the sudden change in light. They stood inside a large room with paneled walls and a blackwood floor polished to a near mirror-like sheen. The light was coming from lanterns, dangling on crystalline chains above their heads and along the walls. It's purple, Lyric said aloud. Fascination buzzed along her skin. The flames are purple. Kel murmured something beside her, but Lyric was too distracted to hear what he said. She looked around, taking in the rest of the room. The way station was similar to the inn back home, with tables and benches and a bar along the wall to her left. Shadowy, curtain-draped booths filled 3 of the corners, one currently being serviced by a dark-haired boy holding a tray. Sitting empty against another wall was a large stone fireplace beneath a trio of 3 dented shields. Despite the lack of fire, the room was warm. Less than 10 people were scattered around the room in clusters of 2s and 3s. They were cloaked and turned their faces away so Lyric couldn't see their features. Who were they, she wondered? Why were they here? Elena walked towards the bar and Lyric followed, distractedly letting go of Kel's hand. A large woman with a shaved head and a long, uneven scar puckering her left cheek nodded at them as they approached. Dandashara, she said, addressing their mother. Good to see you again. Lyric raised her eyebrows. Dandashara? How many names do their mother have? Galgosha, Elena said, her voice rich with pleasure. Got any of that Fendraken wine I love so much? I always keep a bottle or 2 around. The bartender, Galgosha, grinned, showing small purple-stained teeth. She reached beneath the counter and withdrew a squat, ugly bottle filled with a viscous liquid that looked like ink. Lyric moved up beside their mother, eyeing the bottle and the large woman curiously. Standing next to Elena as she was, she caught the grin that crossed their mother's face as she slapped an odd, triangle-shaped piece of iron on the bar top. It was a roguish grin, one Lyric had never seen on their mother's face before. Galgosha palmed the iron coin and eyed Lyric, Kel, and Runa, then placed 4 glasses on the counter beside the bottle. Traveling with companions again, Dandashara? Did you tell them about what happened with the... Always good to see you, Gal, Elena said, cutting her off with a broad wink. Did you find the location I asked for? Galgosha shook her head, looking regretful. They're careful. No magic since they entered. Elena grimaced and nodded. If the supplier makes an appearance, can you send them over? Will do, Galgosha said. She grinned and saluted. Grabbing the bottle and 2 of the glasses, Elena headed towards one of the curtained corners. Lyric grabbed the remaining 2 glasses and shared a confused look with her sister. Based on the expression on Runa's face, if she'd started to soften towards their mother after their earlier conversation, that feeling had passed. Hesitating, Lyric turned back to the bartender. Excuse me, she said. Do you have any bandages or burn ointment? My mother's arm was burned. Galgosha's eyes flickered and she reached under the bar. Here, she said, setting a small box on the counter. Remind her a sick wolf is a dead one, Galgosha said, nodding at Elena's back. Lyric raised an eyebrow. All right, she said, though she didn't understand. Thank you. Smiling goodbye, she handed the glasses to Kel and picked up the box, then followed their mother towards the booth she'd chosen. Kel, moving ahead of Lyric and Runa, held back the curtain so they could slip inside after Elena. Runa instead picked the curved bench on the left, but she didn't move far enough in for Lyric to sit beside her. Resisting the urge to pinch her sister, Lyric slid in on the side of their mother, scooting down to make room for Kel. Smiling, he sat down beside her, laying an arm on the back of the bench, and Lyric tried not to get distracted when his leg pressed against hers. Elena made a noise, and Kel shifted abruptly, breaking the contact. Here, Lyric said, sliding the box toward their mother. For your arm. Dandashara, Runa asked. A predatory glint shone in her eyes. Their mother pursed her lips and, shifting the box to the side, unstoppered the wine bottle. She poured the thick liquid into 1 glass, then eyed Lyric and Runa and filled the other 3. Setting the bottle back onto the table, Elena lifted her glass and emptied it. When she set the cup back down, the pressure of her fingers pressing against the bubbled glass created a soft popping sound. I've had to be many people these past 4 years, Elena said. Dandashara. And Marlena? Lyric asked. She looked between Kel and her mother. How do you know each other? We met in Caneford, Kel said, on the border of Rendishar and Chiancia. He looked at Elena as though seeking permission. Elena sighed. I asked him to come here, she said. Betrayal hit like a fist to Lyric's chest. She breathed in, the breath jagged and unsteady, and looked at Kel. His eyes were guilty, and she flushed as she looked away, angrily reaching for one of the filled glasses. Lyric knew it was ridiculous to feel anything about him. She didn't know Kel, but the idea that he'd found her because Elena asked him to, and not because he'd been interested in her story, bothered her. Lyric flushed again and dumped the wine into her mouth. It burned, the taste sharp and strange, and she coughed, slamming the cup onto the table harder than she intended. She felt a cool hand on her back and knew it was Kel's, and her face heated again. Thankfully, Runa spared her from further embarrassment and drew away Kel and Elena's attention with a question. Why? She asked. Why ask Kel to find us? Are you even a songsmith? Lyric looked up, eyes watery as she peered through her tangled hair. Runa was staring at Kel with a pointed, suspicious look. I am a songsmith, Kel said. He sounded honest, earnest. He is, Elena said. I asked him to protect you. I wasn't sure when I'd be able to come myself, and I knew the Sireni were looking for you. Guilt flashed across her face. I thought you might trust him more easily than a sellsword. Straightening, Lyric tucked her hair behind her ears. She risked a look at Kel. "Why come?" she asked. "Did she pay you?" Runa asked, her voice sharp. Kel angled his body towards Lyric. His eyes were bright, apologetic. "Your mother helped me, saved me, actually. So when she asked for my help, I agreed," he said, speaking to Lyric alone. It seemed important to him that she believed him, forgave him. "She thinks she can help me. I told you how I couldn't remember." His hand lifted to his throat, his fingertips brushing the tattooed skin. "I don't remember how my mother or my father died. If we remove the spell, maybe." His voice trailed off, and Lyric saw hope and desire spiral inside his eyes, the desire to know. She resisted the urge to touch his face and looked back at Elena. "You can do that?" Lyric asked. Could their mother remove a silencing spell? But if that were possible, why hadn't she already helped Kel? "No," Elena said, shaking her head. Her eyes caught on Kel's arm behind Lyric's back, and Lyric felt him pull it down into his lap. "I can't, but my father—" Elena paused, her face tightening. "My family has collected magical tomes for centuries. Our private library is one of the finest in the world. If a record exists on how to remove Kel's spell, my father has it." A warning entered their mother's eyes. "You need to realize that your grandfather is a dangerous man." She stared at Lyric and Runa, her face tight and severe. "He's used dark magic before, releasing a plague on a Sereni ship. If he'd had more time, training, it might have spread. It might have—" She pushed her cup away, reaching for the bottle. "He was involved with Thenda. I can feel it in my bones." "You think he caused the taint?" Runa asked. Lyric gasped and looked at her sister. "You can't believe that he would." Runa shrugged. "We don't know him," she said. "If he's willing to lure and kill a young woman, what else is he capable of?" Lyric jerked her eyes back to their mother. "Mama, do you honestly believe our grandfather destroyed Thenda?" Elena scraped the bottle across the table, balancing it on its edge, then met Lyric's eyes. "I don't have proof," she said, "but he's connected somehow. He knows people that—" She glanced at Kel. "He is involved." "Is he who you learned that spell from?" Runa asked, pointing at their mother's bandaged arm. "Blood magic," Elena said. "No." Her voice was tight and fierce. "But he uses it. It's dangerous magic, erratic, exacting. Please, promise me you will never attempt it." She glared at them both, as though challenging them to defy her. Lyric leaned back, feeling overwhelmed and out of depth. "I don't even know how he would learn," she said. She glanced at Runa and saw her sister's jaw set stubbornly. "Who asked you to return to Rendishar?" Runa asked. "You said someone convinced you to abandon us. Was it our father?" Their mother blinked, surprise flashing across her face. An exhalation of breath left her, not quite a laugh, but a startled, incredulous sound, and she scrubbed a hand through her thick hair. No, it was my brother Reynard who asked me to return." "Who is our father?" Runa asked. She leaned forward and placed a hand on the table, fingers tight against the scratched surface. Lyric blinked. Despite the abruptness of the question, it was one she wanted an answer to as well. She looked at their mother, who seemed still a touch off balance. "Girls," Elena said, her voice tired, "perhaps we could—" "You said he was a sailor," Lyric said. Their mother was answering questions. Maybe she'd finally tell them about their father. "Did he sail the Sea of Screams?" She thought about the Sireni, what little she knew of them. Of course, you didn't have to be Sireni to work on a ship, but if he was a simple sailor from Kaliz or Rimborsha, why would Elena hide him? Why had she withheld his name? Elena looked past them, out into the room. She licked her lips, a distant look in her eyes. "They don't know," she said, finally. "The Sireni don't know." "Don't know what?" Lyric asked. "That your father is one of them." Kel exhaled softly beside Lyric, but she didn't look over to see his expression. When Elena had first told them about their connection to Rendishar, Lyric had found herself asking about the Sireni. She hadn't known why. Their father was Sireni, and somehow Lyric had known. "Does our grandfather know?" Runa asked. Their mother put a hand over her mouth and shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "If he did—" She shook her head again. "I'm not certain he knows you exist. Your father's brother knows, and a few of his clan, but that's it." Elena stared at Lyric and Runa, holding their eyes in turn. "This knowledge is dangerous. The Sireni already want you for being my daughters. If they discovered you share both Rendisharan and Sireni blood—" Lyric sunk back against the booth. She felt adrift, as if her head had floated away. Everything she'd ever believed was a lie. Everything she thought she would become now seemed impossible, foolish. Kel shifted, and his hand brushed against her knee. Lyric focused on it, drawing comfort from the accidental contact, trying to ground herself. What does our father think about this? Lyric asked. Is he still alive? Their mother looked down, lips pressing tight, and rubbed the knuckles of her left hand. He's alive, she said. She looked back up, staring into Lyric's face with regret and concern in her hazel eyes. I hadn't planned to tell you this way, Elena admitted. About your past, about me. Not like this, all at once, all jumbled together. You didn't expect to tell us at all, Runa said flatly. Elena's hand slapped the table, her eyes flashing like something had caught fire inside them. You don't know what it's been like for me, she hissed. You don't know. She cut off, staring wide-eyed at Lyric, who'd drawn back, heart pounding. Breathing in, her hand clenching, Elena leaned back, agonized eyes flickering to Runa. Runa, spots of color high on her cheeks, was staring back with wet-eyed intensity. Her chest heaved, her emotions just beneath the surface. The translucent quality to her shape wavered, flickering opaque. Rue, you're changing, Lyric said, distracted. Her sister looked down, mouth open, and the odd flicker went away. I don't know what that was, she said. Elena cleared her throat, face composed again, and clasped her hands in her lap. We should rest, she said. I've told you all I can for now. We need to do what we came here for. She looked at Runa, regret hollowing her face. I need to think, decide what to do next. Runa looked up, face and eyes cold, controlled. Which we will discuss and decide on together, she said. Their mother bristled like a cat with her back up, then nodded. Weariness rounded her shoulders. She looked drained. Galgosha will give us a room. We'll be safe here. We can sleep for a few hours, then decide what to do. Can we agree? Rest? Lyric stared at her sister pointedly. The air was charged with emotion, and she wanted to cry and scream. She resisted the urge to grab Kel's hand and pressed her hands flat on her knees. Hold it together, she thought. We're together. Everything will be fine. Runa broke off her stare with Elena and looked at Lyric, nodding once. Fine, Runa said. She slid out of the booth, standing stiffly as Elena moved past her. Kel stood too, and Lyric scooted out after him. He reached for her like he wanted to offer her his hand, but then pulled it back and stuck it in his pocket, eyes darting to Elena's drawn face. Not catching Kel's look, their mother signed with her hand to Galgosha on the other side of the room, and the bartender signaled something back. This way, Elena said. She led them along the wall, past the fireplace, to an unobtrusive doorway, which opened into a small hall. Runa hung back, waiting to enter last, so Lyric followed Elena inside with Kel on her heels. They walked to a staircase and headed down. This is strange, Lyric said aloud, breaking the tense silence. Usually in inns you climb up. Are we sleeping in the cellar? She laughed. Exhaustion was making her feel silly. The way station is more like a series of caves than a building, their mother said. The stairs ended at a long hallway filled with closed doors. Lyric eyed them as they passed. They all seemed uniform, with nothing distinguishing one from another. Elena paused at the fourth door on the left and opened it with a quick push. Moving up behind their mother, Lyric peered inside the room. It was small, with 2 beds taking up most of the available space. The walls were empty of decorations, and there were no windows. Beside the door was a chair and table, upon which sat a lamp that emitted purple light. Covering the floor was a threadbare rug. Is that animal skin? Lyric asked curiously. What kind of animal has purple fur? Let's get out of the hallway, Elena said, ushering them inside. They bunched together as Elena shut the door, and Lyric bumped against Kel. She tilted her head back, smiling brightly. Kel stared at her, a mix of curiosity and pleasure lightening his eyes, and for a breath, Lyric forgot where they were. Their shared moment was interrupted by Runa shoving past, and Lyric's chin slammed into Kel's chest. Lyric and Kel laughed, wincing, and she grabbed his arm to steady herself. Runa flopped onto one of the beds. I feel more solid here, she said aloud, addressing no one. Lyric glanced at her, and it looked like Runa wanted to tell her something, but then her sister's eyes slid to their mother and her face shuddered. I wonder why that is, Lyric said, moving around Kel to sit beside her sister. She thought about how Runa's body had shifted in the common room upstairs, and glanced at her sister's face, raising an eyebrow. Later, Runa muttered, have you seen anything? Seen? Lyric asked. Like what? Never mind. You should sleep, their mother said. I'll keep watch. Kel moved aside, allowing Elena to sit down on the bed opposite Lyric and Runa. Their mother rubbed a hand over her face, her eyes shadowed. You look exhausted, Mama, Lyric said. Maybe you should sleep first. She gestured at the closed door. Do we need to keep watch? We're in a locked room. Elena eyed the door, swaying slightly. Old habits, she said. We are as safe as we can be here. Galgosha is upstairs. Lyric smiled. She looks like she could take on a Sereni or two. Yes, she can, their mother said, chuckling. I'll sit in the chair, Kel said. Lyric glanced at him in confusion, then blushed as she realized why he was picking the uncomfortable-looking chair. There were 4 of them in the small room, and only 2 beds. I don't mind sharing, Elena said to Kel. Just stay on your side. Kel cleared his throat and ran a hand through his hair. It's fine, he said. I've done this before. Falling asleep in a chair, that is. He sat down and stretched out his legs, crossing his ankles. Shifting against the back of the chair, he wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and chest. Elena shrugged and laid down. The supplier will be stopping by. We can trade then. Supplier? Runa asked. Elena yawned and crossed her arms over her chest, shutting her eyes. They'll have food and clothes for travel, and maybe... She began to snore. Lyric grinned and looked at Runa, who snorted. Might as well sleep too, Runa said. She pulled her legs up onto the bed and rolled over, close to the wall. Lyric glanced at Kel, who was reaching for the lamp. We'll be fine, he said, smiling at her. Of course, Lyric said. She stared into his eyes. She hadn't been thinking about the Sirene. Kel tapped the lamp, turning it off, and Lyric blinked in the sudden darkness. She lay down carefully and listened to the sound of her sister shifting beside her, and their mother's soft snores. Something scuffed against the floor, probably Kel moving his foot. Lyric's thoughts drifted to home. Had the Sireni found their house? What had they done after discovering Lyric was gone? Had their neighbors noted that Lyric and Runa were missing? Had Tora come back for... Someone was shaking her awake. Lyric opened her eyes and stared up at a purple sky. Where was the sun or the stars? Her head felt thick, her senses slow. She sat up and stared at the rough wood beneath her. Was she on a ship? It wasn't rocking side to side. Had it run aground? Lyric didn't feel like she was moving at all. Turning her head to the right, Lyric found an old woman kneeling beside her. The woman's square face was wrinkled and darkened by the sun, and her small blue eyes steadied her with a bird's keen focus. Old tattoos curled down the sides of her throat and across her upper chest. The ink faded to a pale blue. Flushing, Lyric realized the woman's chest was bare, and she jerked her eyes to the collection of chains that hung between her breasts. Crafted from delicate strands of metal and threaded with a variety of seashells, ocean-tumbled stones, and pieces of carved wood, the necklaces shifted as the woman moved, catching the light. A long white skirt covered the woman's lower body that she tucked beneath her knees. Sashes in blue, green, red, and yellow wrapped her waist. Hello, the old woman said, smiling. Her face looked kind, her smile genuine. Lyric immediately felt safe in her presence and returned the woman's smile. Hello, she echoed. I'm Lyric. Who are you? Was she dreaming? What happened to the room where she slept? Where were Runa and Kel? Where was their mother? My name is Gandara, the old woman said. You are wondering where you are? Yes, Lyric said. She frowned and eyed the woman's face. Am I sleeping? Yes, Gandara said. I am borrowing your dream. You're a ghost? Lyric guessed. Gandara smiled and inclined her head. I lived many ages ago. Lyric eyed the woman's unfamiliar clothes. Are you Sireni? Yes, I am your ancestor. Your blood sang out to me when you arrived. Her eyes filmed and she seemed to disappear inside herself. I want to help you, Gandara said, her eyes refocusing on Lyric's face. Help me how? You are untrained. Someone might take advantage of that. Like who? Gandara's face darkened, and she pointed a gnarled finger at the center of Lyric's chest. The fire blood burns in you, too. You must be careful you are not swayed by their bloodlust, their desire for power, for destruction. I'm sorry, Lyric said uncertainly. What are you talking about? Was she referring to their mother, Lyric being half Rendasharan? You will call the winds, Gandara said. Her eyes grew distant again, and Lyric steadied her with concern. The old woman seemed forgetful, her mind drifting. I can teach you the language of the ancients, Gandara said. Dragon runes, Lyric asked. Gandara grimaced, a look of distaste on her face. Ancient runes, she repeated. Lyric stared at her. Wasn't Sereth the Sirene's progenitor still a dragon, even if she lived in the ocean? It seemed that the distrust between the Sireni and Rendasharans did run deep. She considered Gandara's words. What was her true motive for seeking to guide her? Was Gandara's offer an attempt to ensure Lyric didn't train in Rendashar? Or was the old woman worried about her mother teaching her? Lyric sighed. That was about as likely as the old gods returning. It couldn't hurt to accept Gandara's help, could it? There was nothing threatening about the old woman. She seemed amiable. Lyric usually got a good sense of people, and she didn't think Gandara wished her harm. And if their mother wasn't going to teach her herself, Gandara might be her only option. Making a decision, Lyric smiled. I'd love to learn, she said aloud. Maybe it was all a dream. It couldn't hurt to accept help from her ancestor. Gandara's face softened into a wide grin. She looked excited, like they were two young girls sharing secrets. I'm happy you came here, she said, beaming. Now that we're connected, I can reach out to you again. Lyric raised an eyebrow. Because of the veil? She asked. She felt silly asking yet another question, but Gandara seemed pleased by her interest. Your link to your sister, Gandara said. Her presence has created certain holes. What do you mean holes? Lyric asked, alarmed. Gandara's smile slipped, eyes growing serious. You need to be careful, she said. She is more fire than water. She will destroy, not flow. Irritated by the old woman's words, Lyric frowned. Runa is a good person, she said. Perhaps, Gandara said, shrugging one rounded shoulder. Be vigilant. Power corrupts. You don't know Runa, Lyric said, her voice sharp. She breathed in, trying to calm herself. Just be cautious, Gandara said soothingly. Now, let me teach you the word for wind. And I think that's probably a good place to stop, considering how long this one was. So, end of chapter 4. Only one chapter today. Hopefully you're enjoying the story so far. So they're still in the Veil. They haven't gone back to the living world yet. We're getting a little more information about Cyrene, Rendishar, their mother's secrets, so many fun stuff. Yeah, I think that before I go, I'm going to show you one awesome thing. I had this art doll made of, can you guess which character this is? I'm sure you can. Runa! This is Runa. This was made by Sarah Mock Art. I'll link her shop, but you probably can't tell, but on the front of her dress, there is a dragon stitched there. And Runa loves her, frowns, and is very suspicious of everyone. So I feel like good attitude. But yeah, incredible art. It is so much fun to have. I wish that I had one for Lyric too, but I just had Runa. Anyway, hope that you're enjoying the series so far. A couple things that I also wanted to mention was that if you wanted to see the map, there is a copy on my website, also in the books, but yeah, a bigger one on the website that you can see it more easily. Look in at some of these places. And also I have some character art on there, specifically a couple of Lyric and Runa, but also I have one of Gandara and Eleonora, the two ancestors that we're now getting to know. So you should definitely check it out. I will link it below. Yeah, I hope that you have an awesome week, and I will be back next Friday with the next chapter. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you later.